Hi, and welcome to this expert spotlight, at which I am very, very delighted to welcome Mr. Cliff Fluet to the conversation. Good morning.
Good morning, Jack.
Nice to have you. I really am delighted that you've made the time to do this. I know you're probably the busiest man I know, and this is something that is really interesting for me to talk to you because of the work I do with authentic artists around the business skills that musicians and artists need to be developing alongside their musicianship, but also, you know, where we are in the stream of time in terms of post-COVID, the changes in the music business, changes in technology, etc. And it's something that, you know, we're really at, you know, a pivotal moment in time, I think. So, you know, knowing that you're operating at the intersection of all those things and more is really interesting to me. So, Cliff, if you would like to introduce yourself, because I think your bio is vast, and I just think you know it better than anybody. So, if you'd like to just sort of explain to people who are not familiar with you and your work, who you are, and what you do, and your roles, many though they are.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much indeed for inviting me as well. It's a real honour to be here. So I am Cliff Fluet. I'm a partner at the law firm Lewis Silkin. I run an advisory firm called 11, which is wholly owned by Lewis Silkin. I also happen to be the chair of the Ivors Academy's Trust, which is its charitable arm, and I'm also a trustee at Help Musicians. And my background, ever since I entered the music industry 25 years ago, when I went into a record company in a pre-internet era, has been very much about building new ways for the music industry to thrive, new technologies, new business models, and new ways in order to get music and out there and artists paid.
Amazing. So even more thanks for being here, because I know that you know we've got a lot to say in terms of, you know, what's relevant right now for not just musicians actually, and I don't say just lightly, but for musicians and for business and technology, because that is also where I'm really interested. My whole background, as you know, has been in technology sales. And I came to the music industry or music business much later in life, as someone learning to write songs. And as a result of that, started to work with, or, you know, become friends with a lot of musicians who, to my surprise and shock, were amazing performers, but really couldn't articulate themselves very well in terms of their networking skills, talking about themselves with confidence, their business skills, you know, and really the practical application of that. So that's, you know, how I came to be coaching them. So in terms of, you know, if we kind of go back a little bit in terms of reflecting on the music business and where we've been in that regard, there's clearly been a lot of changes. How would you sum that up in terms of some of the major changes in the last few years, maybe 10 years or 15 years?
I suppose my big thing is I'm surprised that people are constantly surprised by things like technology. I mean, ever since the start of the music industry, I mean, you know, I have to sometimes gently explain to people. So my world, where everyone's obsessed with copyright, is that copyright is a 250-year late reaction to to technology, which is the printing press.
Right.
You know, and so it has come to be the sort of very strange relationship that the music industry has with technology. And when you explain that, you know, sort of a piano is music technology, people go, "What?" So, well, I press a button and music comes out. Oh, you know, that's very different than the AI platform. Very, very different. Spoiler alert, they're the same. So the music industry has a very, very tortured relationship with technology. Technology started copyright. You know, there's lots of people that think that copyright was this wonderful thing that existed in the Garden of Eden, and then this horrible thing called technology slithered in and disrupted it all. It's all nonsense. So what we've seen over the last 20 years has been very much the music industry trying to get its head around the internet. And in the last 5 years, it really has finally latched onto a model on streaming, But, there were people at that time at the dawn of streaming who did their very, very best for it not to happen. These are the same people that are reaping the benefits of it now. So I suppose what we're doing is that, there's lots of people out there that say, oh, copyright's a problem. Copyright's not a problem. Licensing is always the answer. Always. Every time the music industry has built an effective licensing system, people have made money. So people starting to perform works in public, that creates a performing right. There's phonograms come along, that creates a communication to the public and broadcasting. Internet comes along, making available. And now what we're seeing, and I'm sure we'll touch on it at some point in the future, which is the DCMS inquiry into the economics of streaming, is all a reaction to the fact that actually the existing laws had never anticipated streaming. But that was the same for every legislative change that happened before. The thing that it was sort of came in was something that nobody had anticipated. So I suppose that's the thing really, which is I just think now that given the fact this keeps happening, we should be spending quite a lot of time anticipating the future. And at the same time, what you've seen is that huge number of different kinds of creatives, so let's say like YouTube influencers, just embraced platforms like YouTube and were able to create an effective form of monetization in a way that perhaps artists haven't been able to. So my sincere hope is that people will now start really, starting to hold things back, is actually embrace these new ways of making money and then getting on to make money.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, having sold technology through the dot-com boom and bust, I've seen that come and go several times as well. And it's surprising, as you say, that it's always a surprise. I think, we should be used to it at least 21 years later, if not longer. Do you think in the music business it's because of a particular mindset? Is it an artistic mindset? Is it something that you've observed as being kind of to do with that at all? Because when I'm coaching creatives, it's very much all about the music and not about the business. And what have been your observations of that? Have you thought about that?
I mean, one of the things I should say up front is that I've never tended to be an advisor to artists, so I've been much more an advisor to the man. That's not from a gender perspective. I'm more active for the businesses and management companies and platforms, but I have worked with a huge number of artists, from my time in the music industry. For many years I was at Warner Music, and then for years after that I was in broadcast, what's now Global Radio. So I've worked with a huge number of artists on various sides of the table. I think in the music industry you have a fairly toxic mix of an industry that just wants to get on and make money and not have to worry about these new horrible things coming along and spoiling their lovely world of CD profits. And then on the artist side, you've got a world where actually artists want to get on and create, right? And they don't want to necessarily have to think about all of these things. And there's a kind of an abdication of that. And I know that might sound pejorative, but I mean that in as kind of as an objective way as possible, which is, oh, a manager will take care of that, or the lawyer will take care of it. And I suppose the only thing that I would just aver is that, often to young artists, I would even say when I was on the record company side of the table, read this agreement. I don't want to read that shit, man. And I'm just thinking, well, there you are. One day you will. And, there's this strange thing where people think that people like Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney, I've heard them both people, oh, they're very near to their money and they're quite abstemious. And, it's like, it's because they've been ripped off, right? I can tell you right now, Paul McCartney and Mick Jagger know most of their business affairs forwards, frontways and backwards. And a lot of that's in the rearview mirror. Exactly. Yeah. Right. And, I'd say McCartney, all right, he's supposed to be worth, close to $1 billion, but he's probably generated 10 times that over the years. When the Beatles were getting a penny a record and gave away their merchandise rights. Well, if you just look at all of that stuff in the rearview mirror, it looks astonishing. So I suppose that's what I would say. And there was a thing where, on the record company side of thing, every artist, they used to say to us, this artist could be the next Beatles. They probably won't be, but they could be. And therefore, on my side of the table, I had to make sure that we had everything locked down as if they were going to be the biggest thing. And then I think that artists should be thinking of themselves as well. And I think the only other thing I would say to that is when I've advised YouTubers, as they were known, social talent influencers, digital influencers, whatever you want to call them, when you would say to them, right, I want you to register your name as a trademark, we'll need to set up that company to hold your rights, that business over there will hold your makeup brushes business, and that element there will be that. They were like, okay, great, let's get on with it. Whereas with artists, nah, I don't want to worry about it, right? Yeah. And then I get people saying, why are these YouTubers making all this money?
Because they protected their rights.
Well, I mean, they've just thought about themselves as a business. It's as simple as that. Anyone that's creating a business is prepared to invest. And the real question I would say from an artist perspective is, or get someone who's going to work with you in order to put those in place. But to simply ignore them and wish them away and not assume that the likes of U2 or Coldplay or whatever don't have these incredible machines behind them focused on those things, which is, until you're rich enough to not to have to worry about it, I'd be a bit worried about it.
And that's the thing, isn't it? You say it's almost like they abdicate responsibility even before they've got anything to worry about. It's like, I'll get a manager and then that will be sorted. And really, I mean, would you advise, for example, from a very practical level, the first person they should engage is a lawyer?
Potentially. I mean, the difference between a lawyer and a manager is it's much easier to get rid of a lawyer than it is a manager. Managers tend to be a much more long-term deal. Whereas a lawyer, you can sort of, it's until you're happy, right? But, at the same time, managers are a hugely important resource, because these people are going to invest in you for no money. They're going to work essentially for free. So they're somewhat aligned, let's say. Yeah. So I wouldn't say necessarily, whilst it might be an order of sequence to go to a lawyer first, I wouldn't say that there's sort of necessarily you don't need a lawyer. Sorry, you don't need a manager if you've got a lawyer, or vice versa. I think that
definitely
would be wrong.
Need both. But I think the first thing you need is a mindset whereby you accept that you need those things, and I mean, take everything.
Yeah, I mean, the number one question I'd be asked when I worked for a label was, what does a label need a lawyer for? And it's like, well, this isn't called a record contract. Yeah, I want one of those. Yeah. Well, who do you think does that? Oh. Although I have to say that when I entered the record industry, I was astonished about how many lawyers they were. And at the time I joined, all of the heads of the labels, apart from Warner's, were from a legal background. And why? Because it's a rights business. And I suppose the only other thing that I would just allude to is sports people. I think that sports people, they understand their worth. They understand the economics around what they do. They understand the lifespan of it, and therefore want to make sure that they maximize that period. And, in the sort of 2005, when the record industry was going south, I was working on a lot of brand deals, working for big brands, trying to work with artists. And then you get artists going, oh, I'm not going to work with brands because that's really uncool. There's not a single sports person on the globe that would say that. Because, well, that's how this gets paid. So again, there is this kind of mindset of, this has got nothing to do with business. I mean, the fact it's called show business, the fact you signed a record contract, the fact that you're giving away these things called rights, let's just hand wave all of that away. And let's hope that we can live in some sort of bubble. I'm sounding a lot more strident and sort of stern than necessarily am, but maybe because it's too early in the morning. But in truth, I think that's the one thing. I mean, the last thing I'll say on that point is, particularly as I was sort of working in the early, and I mean literally the earliest days of influencers, I say, well, what's the difference between these guys, these influencers, and these artists? And they were like, oh, talent would be what they would say. I said, look, I think most of them would bet on themselves. And I think that would be my observation. is that there is an artistic mindset that betting on yourself is somehow wrong or arrogant. And that to me is a very, very strange view. If
And I
you've got
think,
the talent to be able to create and curate in the way that these people are, why on earth wouldn't you at some level bet on yourself?
yeah, and I think that strength of, the passion around that for both you and I is, we care. You care really a lot about, having these really talented, amazing people succeed. And the success is, there's a lot of good, a good living to be had on the way to stardom, if that's your goal. It's not that you've got all or nothing. And I do observe this mindset a lot. It's like it's nothing or it's, everything. There's this 0 to 100 sort of miles an hour mentality. If it's like, I'm not doing it at all, or I want everything, and, go for it 100%, and I recognize that as a creative mindset because I've been guilty of that myself. And I think the ability to see the journey and what's possible, if you're not number one globally and, got all the trappings of that sort of hitting the big time stardom, you know, what's the point of bothering with it? And there's just so much in the middle that I think people don't realise.
I agree. I'd also, that I'm just on that point, is that imposter syndrome, there's a lot of artists who think they're the only people who suffer it. Most of the people that I've met in business at some point have confessed to an element of it. So it's not something that's unique to the artistic mindset at all. I think what happens is that in the world of business or in the world of sports or influencers or whomever, as it were, I think what they do is sort of understand it and contextualize it rather than seeing it as some rule.
I agree. Yeah. I think we all think we're different and weird and, unworthy in some way, and everybody feels that way. So we need to kind of address it, which is obviously what my coaching does a lot of in terms of that inner work. But to recognize that is normal, and then find strategies to help you through it. And it's really important. Yeah, thank you for that. So thinking about obviously coming to present day and the fact that we've, had this unprecedented pandemic and the music industry has suffered enormously. And, that we can't say enough about how much, but, what are your thoughts about what's it like now for people in terms of, possibilities, potential, where things are going, how technology is changing? Thoughts around that?
Yeah. Well, I've said it before, and I'm sure I'll have to say it again. The thing about COVID is it's brutal in the face of underlying conditions, and the underlying condition of the music industry, particularly from an artist's perspective, was an over-reliance of live. I think almost without exception, any working artist, the majority of their money came from touring. Or certainly the majority of profit as well would come from something like touring. So you end up in a bizarre and awful position where that's just kicked away, that exposed. And a lot of the DCMS inquiry and things like that, I struggle to believe that any of that would have happened but for, these extraordinary and terrible events. We're in a world where you can't.
Really big artists, sorry to interrupt you, really big artists that suffered that as well. They hadn't, I think, there was a couple that said in the inquiry that they hadn't realised how little they got from streaming until their live money went away.
Yeah. And of course, the issue about live money, before anyone sort of piles onto the big artists, is the big artists have their crew who are like family. They had tours booked, they have lighting rigs, they have costumes, all of the ecosystem that comes around live from the venues, etc. It's an extraordinary. So just for that to be sort of violently kicked away, therefore threw into non-sharp relief, so those issues. So in that context, it's now got people really focused upon these other areas. And of course, what it did was that it forced everyone to stay at home. So I need to check, but at one point, I think the share price of Spotify doubled during the pandemic because demonstrated the resilience of their business model to COVID. So that's great for Spotify. Spotify, I've always been a very big fan of Spotify. Spotify, doesn't pay artists, it pays rights holders, it pays labels. And so artists complaining about where the money comes from should be speaking to the people that pay them rather than speaking to the people at Spotify. It's all that I'm going to say on that particular debate. But really, it's only the start of having kickstarted a whole new paradigm for how people get their music out there. So I'm spending a lot of time thinking, talking, and working in the metaverse, which is the next step. I mean, most of us thought that the metaverse would probably arrive in 2030, but I would say that's probably been accelerated by 5 years by the internet. And that's essentially.
I don't understand that. What do you mean by that?
I was just going to come out to that. So, well, I mean, I was giving a talk on the metaverse to 200 people in the film industry, and someone sort of piped up and said, I don't believe in the metaverse. And it's like, well, you're speaking to 200 of your peers in an entirely virtual environment. I have bad news for you. This is the metaverse. So the metaverse is from a science fiction concept. It's essentially, you're talking about virtualized lands and virtualized worlds. So probably a good example of what that might be Fortnite, or like where you're in a completely immersive environment. But Peloton is metaversal. You're sat there riding with 50 other people in a Peloton virtually with someone teaching you in a class on the screen. That's the metaverse. Zoom is the metaverse. Alexa is the metaverse. And then as technologies like 5G become more instant and more intelligent and talking to each other as well, we'll live with a kind of a new layer of existence. And the founder of Epic Games, the founders of Fortnite, they've made it very, very clear that they are going to build the metaverse. And we're going to have a whole new world where we have devices on us which talk to things around us and become more and more intelligent. I can control my car or my watch, indeed. And then, the next screen is probably going to look something a lot like this for what happens. And as things move into that realm, the question is going to be, how are people going to make money? And one area which of course has got a lot of heat and light around it is that the current bet is that the currency of the metaverse is going to be NFTs and non-fungible tokens, and people being able to have virtual goods with virtual value, which in a virtual world will probably have more value than the real world. So in that world, which unfortunately we have one foot firmly in, not least on this particular Zoom call, the question, the opportunity for monetization, the opportunity for the music industry to do really well is huge. But it'll be like the internet. The question I would have for rights holders and labels and collecting societies, are you ready for the metaverse? And then from an artist perspective, this is why artists really have seized these platforms, and they go, oh, hang on. If I make virtual goods and I have virtual fan bases, and I have the opportunity to be able to create and curate things that people buy and sell and resell, and I always get paid, that's quite interesting to me. So that's an indication of just one of the areas of where and how and why. What we've got going on right now is, we're only at the end of the beginning.
Indeed, yeah. And in my old world, that would be, cloud-based platforms that are ubiquitous and accessible anywhere you've got a connection. And of course, the next layer is this fully immersive AI, VR. There's all kinds of different applications to enhance that experience that is just rich with potential for artists and creators, because they're the ones with the great ideas, really. That the creatives, nothing would exist without them, really. And yet the ability to monetize it sometimes eludes them.
And we're seeing a world where lots of that's creative talent that might have gone into the music industry. Lots of them are going into the world of tech and coding. Yeah. Because they see that, one, they got a route to making money, but two, arguably they're less constrained in their creativity. And if you go away and become a coder in Google's DeepMind or something like that, the opportunity to be able to just create crazy shit and then implement it is much greater, much greater. And if you look at the moves, Facebook has got its Horizon platform, which is its kind of metaverse. You've got what Snapchat are doing with their AR glasses, and you've got this whole new world. The real question I would have is, to what extent are artists thinking about that? How are they thinking about what things are going to be in a metaversal rather than a, dare I say, universal world?
Indeed. Fascinating. Can we talk a little bit about your charity involvement? You say you're chair of the trustees at the Ivors charity, and also on the board of Help Musicians UK. I know, having done some coaching for Help Musicians in the last 18 months, 2 years, just how much demand there's been for funding, etc. What are your thoughts on the charity involvement?
Yeah, well, to quote an old comedy thing, do a lot of work for charity, don't like to talk about it, but since you asked. Yes, I'm involved in a couple of charities, both of them music-based. So I'm chair of the Ivors Academy Trust. So Ivors Academy is essentially the campaigning organisation on behalf of songwriters and creators. But that sits distinct from its charity. And the aims of the charity are to be able to support the creators and songwriters who need it most. We've got a real focus upon people from diverse backgrounds, of all types of ability, all types of socioeconomic, all of the people that have been locked out in what has been seen to be sort of a quite white male, able-bodied type world has been locked off. So that's what Ivors Academy Trust does. Help Musicians is the trading name of what used to be known as the Musicians Benevolent Fund. And Help Musicians really is about that. It's now about helping musicians rather than the Benevolent Fund, which was very much focused upon you've hit hard times, you may be able to apply. Now the focus is not to replace that, but to extend that. And a lot of the work that's being done is sort of proactive rather than palliative. And working with they've got things like mentoring schemes, they've got grant giving schemes, they've got development schemes, they're supporting businesses and coaches and developing elements. Is that, how do we become much more about, sort of prevention rather than simply cure?
Yeah. So if people weren't aware, there's a lot of funding available through Help Musicians, certainly, and help, there's an abundance of help. I think it's unlocked quite a lot of initiatives through COVID that hopefully will be sustained and ongoing to help people through those, stages of development.
They are, and there's also, quite a significant, rather than just Help Musicians, you've got things like PRS Foundations, which is very much about supporting new music and development ideas. There are charities that exist for a very specific genre, like Sound of Music, which is about new music in the classical composed sense of it as well. And I think it's really about reaching out to help. I think that musicians aren't great, again, asking for help, generally speaking. There is a sense, and maybe it's from its romantic notion of being, sort of struggling artist. But, for me, I think there's very little romance in the struggle.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think I'm on a mission really to bust that myth of you need to be a struggling artist or a starving musician. That's something you can develop the skill to move through, as much as develop the skills in music. The music, I always said, in between the music and the business is you, and the ability to bring both of those things to bear to sustain your creativity over time, to thrive, and to be able to be freer to do more things. I think is an amazing gift to the world. I think without music we'd have been absolutely lost and creativity in this last pandemic. So, you know, thank goodness we have them. But I think the ability to not just value them from the outside in, but for them to value themselves from the inside out is, you know, something that needs a bit more balance.
I think that's right. And I think for me, you know, there is a real question of, you know, just in life, you know, if you're not going to value yourself, don't expect others to.
Yeah.
It's like sort of quite patronizing and paternal, but, you know, even from a business perspective, when I work with startups and things like that, it's like, well, what's your narrative? I was like, well, I don't know. It's like, well, if you don't have a narrative, why would you expect any investor on the planet to invest in that? And then very quickly, people then think about that.
Yeah. And that's exactly where I started, really, with, you know, the ability to network effectively and have a compelling thing to say. You know, what I found was most people I asked, so what do you do? They just list a bunch of things they can do. They don't talk about, you know, why they make music or what kind of music or why it's interesting or why you should care. You know, any of those things that go into any pitch, you know, what's the story? People are interested in the story.
Yeah, but what there does seem to be is significant traction with these romantic myths, you know. So I'm not sure there's been one artist on the planet who's just been spotted by an A&R person and then just signed on the spot. I mean, that just never happens. You know, when I was in a record company, in the kitchen, next to the bin, there was just a big bag full of people's tapes that they'd sent in, because, you know, they don't listen to those, right? That's not how it works. The artists who get signed are the one that there's been a buzz around. They're the ones who've created a bit of hype around them. That's, you know, 25 years ago, in the 90s. Now the hustle is online. You know, have they built a following? Have they built a fan base? Have they created this? Have they booked these shows? Have they got out there? You know, some people call it hustle. Some people call it networking. Other people just say it's good business.
And it's all of those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if there is a question that you always wish you would you'll get asked and normally. Is there anything that you before we finish up, you know, anything that you want to contribute and talk about that typically you don't get to?
I think that one of the things I just love to be asked more, in the same way, is why things are like they are, rather than an accepting of people just saying, right, well, this is the royalty, or this is the way it is, this is the way it's that. That is something, when I'm working with technology business, they'll go, why? Why is that? Or if you speak to an influencer and say, right, you know, and you're going to do a deal with this person and they're going to pay you 25%. What's happening to the other 75%? Will be the question I will always get from the influencer. I will never get that from an artist. And you know, in life, sometimes there's only a bad, but there's a bad excuse. Sometimes there's not a good reason, but I think it's really, really important to ask the question
and understand the answer.
Yeah, absolutely, because then you understand that there is a reason why things are like they are. And if it's not a good reason, you at least understand why it is. And then you can spend your life trying to disprove that and demonstrate why that's a bad reason. But the worst one is when people just ignore it with a classic, well, that just won't apply to me.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about, you know, if you need to get paid, you need to pay attention if you're going to get paid. So you've got to pay attention to your business.
Yeah, totally. But, you know, and you know, to any aspiring people out there, as I said, the idea that for any of the most successful artists on the planet, they don't have that around them, it's just not true. It's just not true.
So the advice to anyone watching is pay attention to your business. It is your business. Only you will care as much about your business as anybody else. Nobody else will care more And if you don't care at all, other people won't either. So
and if you want to break free of the system, the best way to do that is do that as a business person. You know, an artist that people will often reference to me, particularly younger artists, is someone like Stormzy. So, oh, he did it outside the system. He didn't do it outside the system. He did it on his own terms. And now he's created a power base where he basically can now do whatever he wants. You know, it's the classic one. You know, it's like I often say to students taking their A-levels, saying, look, just work hard for these 2 years and it will be shit. You can take the rest of your life off like I did. If you don't, you won't. It's that simple, you know. So the real question is that, you know, if it does mean, oh God, I've got to pay someone, or I've got to pay a coach, I've got to pay a manager, I've got to pay a lawyer, I've got to pay an accountant, that'll be so you never have to worry about paying anything ever again.
I totally agree. Cliff, it's been fascinating. I know your time is precious and we haven't got much left. So I will thank you for, on my behalf and everybody else who watches this, for your time and for your expertise and your opinions on things and reflection. And you know, hope that we can see more of the artists that we care about, the creatives and the musicians, really taking a hold of this opportunity to create something new and fresh, and after this kind of massive reset, and be amazingly successful as well as just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. To misquote the government, you know, if not now, when? Right? If you're not going to use this opportunity to reset, then when?
Exactly. You've only got the now. Thank you, and I will speak to you soon.